This is Koshari, and if you've never had it before and you're a carb lover, then you're missing out on the best carb-loaded dish ever. This carb lover's dream is made of rice, pasta, lentils, and chickpeas, served with an array of sauces that give it a spicy kick and a strong tang. It's both a street food and the national dish of Egypt. It came about when Egyptians fell in love with an Indian dish called Koshari made of lentils and rice that had been brought to Egypt by the British. I've stolen the recipe from my mother-in-law, and today we'll be making the world's best koshari with all of the fixings, just like you find it on any street corner in Cairo. Before we get started, I'm Obi and I want to get you cooking delicious Middle Eastern food at home. Consider subscribing if you'd like to see new step-by-step Middle Eastern recipes every week. Now let's jump right in. Now there's a lot of different components that make up this dish, and today we're going to perfect every single one of them to make the ultimate koshari. We've got some amazing cumin, chickpeas and lentils that could be a dish all on their own, a technique for making fried onions that stay crispy for a long time, 2 amazing tomato sauces and a 3rd tangy garlic and vinegar sauce, and finally the koshari base, which marries all the flavours together when made using the technique I'll show you. The first thing we'll start with is the chickpeas, and that's because they take a long time to cook. You can use either dried chickpeas or canned ones here. If you're using dried ones like I am, then they need to be soaked in room temperature water for up to 12 hours. In my left hand you can see the dried ones, and in my right hand you can see how big they get once soaked. To soak them, add 225 grams or 8 ounces of dried chickpeas into a bowl and cover with a large amount of water. The longer you soak them, the less time they will take to cook. Here's what they look like after soaking for 8 hours. You'll notice that they've absorbed a lot of the water. Drain them and then set them aside. Canned chickpeas can be cooked without soaking, though I recommend rinsing them first. You'll need about 750 grams or 26 ounces of canned chickpeas if you want to use them. To cook the chickpeas, we'll start off by adding a large amount of water to a pot on high heat. When it's almost boiling, we'll add our chickpeas. We'll also add in a whole large plum tomato and 2 garlic cloves for added flavour. Next up, peel an onion and chop it in half before adding both halves to the pot. To season it, we'll add 1 teaspoon of ground cumin and 1 teaspoon of salt. Finally, add in half a teaspoon of cayenne chili powder and give it a mix. You should let this boil for 1 to 2 hours, and if the water starts to evaporate, then add more. The chickpeas are ready when you can easily crush them with your fingers and they are soft throughout, so start checking them after 1 hour has passed. Like I mentioned, these chickpeas are insanely delicious on their own, so if you're ever in the mood for some chickpeas, you could just serve these over rice. While the chickpeas are cooking, we can start with the lentils, and these will end up going into the koshari rice base later on. For authentic koshari, you need to use dark brown lentils such as these. Depending on where you live, these are either called black or brown lentils, but there are different shades and varieties. Like beans, lentils have different textures and flavours depending on the variety, so I'd recommend buying them in person so you get the right kind. Fill a pot with about 2 litres or quarts of water and bring to a boil. Then season the water with 1 teaspoon of salt and 1 teaspoon of ground cumin. Next, add in 250 grams or 8 3/4 ounces of the brown lentils and let them boil in the water for 30 to 60 minutes until they're soft and tender. About the 30-minute mark, start checking the lentils for doneness. They're ready when they feel almost al dente and you can crush them with your fingers, but they shouldn't be mushy. When they reach this stage, drain them using a colander and make sure to keep any of the liquid that they were boiled in, as we'll add that to the rice for extra flavour. Next up, we can get started on the 2 tomato sauces. The first one is a smooth tangy garlic tomato sauce, whereas the second is a chunky spicy tomato sauce. To kick them off, we need to peel a whole bunch of garlic, about 22 cloves in total. I've shown this trick before, but the easiest way to peel a large amount of garlic is to cut the end off of a head of garlic and then cut the root off of each individual clove. Next, just place your cloves on the cutting board and hit them with something heavy or press down with the side of your knife. Pick up the garlic clove and the skin should just slide right off. To make the garlic tomato sauce, we'll start off by adding 4 tablespoons of oil or butter to a saucepan on medium-high heat. Next, mince 10 of the garlic cloves and add them to the pot. Mix the garlic with the oil and let it fry for about a minute until it's fragrant and bubbly. Just when it's starting to brown, add in 4 tablespoons of white vinegar and mix to deglaze the pot. Before the vinegar evaporates, add in 800 grams or 28 ounces of crushed tomatoes or passata, which you can make by blending chopped tomatoes together. Give it a quick mix, and then once it comes to a boil, we'll season with 1 teaspoon of salt and a 1/4 teaspoon pepper. Let the sauce simmer for about 20 to 30 minutes until thickened and it resembles this. The next sauce is the spicy tomato sauce, which you can use to spice up the koshari to your liking. To add some heat, we'll be using fresh green chilies. Slice a spicy green chili into thin circles. I'm only using 1 chili because mine is pretty hot, but if yours are weaker, you could add more chilies or chili powder. The sauce starts the same way as the other tomato sauce. We add 4 tablespoons of oil to a saucepan on medium-high heat and then add 5 minced garlic cloves. While the garlic is frying, we add the chopped up chilies and we allow the 2 of them to fry together for a few minutes until fragrant. Once you can smell the chilies, add in 2 tablespoons of white vinegar and stir to deglaze the pot. Next, add in 400 grams or 14 ounces of chopped tomatoes and stir well. Let the mixture simmer for about 20 minutes until it's thick and chunky. It should resemble this. The third and final sauce we'll make is called Dakkah, and it's a raw vinegar and garlic sauce. It's used to add tang and acidity to your koshari. And to make it, we'll start off by adding 7 minced garlic cloves to a jug. Next, add in 1/3 cup of white vinegar and 1/3 cup of water. Juice a lemon and then add 1/4 cup of lemon juice to the jug. To season it, we'll add 2 teaspoons of ground cumin, a teaspoon of ground coriander, and half a teaspoon of cayenne pepper. Finally, add in half a teaspoon of salt, and then using a tiny whisk, stir it all together to combine. Taste it for seasoning and then set it aside for use later. Onto the crispy fried onions, and these are perfect for topping koshari with because of their texture and delicious caramelized flavour. Now to make these really crispy, we'll first macerate them with salt. To make these, you'll need to peel and slice 6 to 8 large onions. When I'm working with this many onions, I find it easiest to chop them in half before peeling off the first layer of onion rather than the skin. It comes off so much quicker and saves you from having to peel tiny pieces of onion skin. To slice the onions, lay them flat on the chopping board and find the grain, which runs from the tip of the onion to the root. Then slice against the grain rather than with it. This will let you get longer strips of onion, and it brings out the flavour and sweetness more than slicing with the grain. Once you've sliced all your onions into strips, you should have a huge pile like this. Add them all to a large bowl, and then add in 2 teaspoons of ground cumin, 1 teaspoon of black pepper, and 2 teaspoons of salt. Give it a good and thorough mixing until well combined, and try to separate all the onion segments into individual strips. You don't want any pieces to be joined together. Let the onions sit like this for 30 minutes or up to an hour, and the salt will draw out excess moisture. When you're ready to fry them, add some vegetable oil to a large pot on high heat till it's about 1.5 centimeters or half an inch deep. Use the same pot you'll use to cook the rice, so that the rice can absorb all of the flavour from the fried onions. When the oil is heated, grab a handful of the onions and squeeze out any excess liquid from them before adding them to the hot oil. Give them a quick stir and then let them fry for about 8 to 12 minutes per batch. Every few minutes, stir the pot so that they don't stick to each other or the pot. After about 8 minutes, they should have started browning. When they get to this colour, you can remove them from the pot as they will continue to darken outside of the oil. Pull them out and then lay them on a paper towel lined tray. Now the key to making sure that these onions crisp up and stay crispy is to evenly space them on the tray. And then after being there for a few minutes, move them to another tray lined with clean paper towels. This makes sure that they don't reabsorb any of the oil that drains off of them. You can also dab them with paper towels to get even more oil off, but the key thing is to make sure that they don't reabsorb oil, otherwise they will soften once more. Fry all of your onions except for a handful, as we'll put those inside the rice base. So with everything cooked, it's time to prepare the base of the koshari, and that's the mixture of rice, pasta and lentils that forms the main part of the dish. To make it, pour out most of the oil from the pot you were frying in, but leave about 1/4 cup of oil in there. Using the same oil from the onions will ensure we get the flavour of the onions throughout the rice. Add the handful of onions you kept behind to the pot and let it fry on medium-high heat for a few minutes until they just start to brown. Measure out 175 grams or 6 ounces of vermicelli and then add it to the pot and stir to combine. Keep mixing and frying the vermicelli for about 3 to 4 minutes until it turns from yellow to this golden brown colour. Next up is the rice, and you'll be adding in 175 grams or 6 ounces of Egyptian or medium grain rice here. You should wash the rice thoroughly beforehand and let it dry for at least an hour so that it doesn't crack when cooking. If you want more info on Egyptian rice and how to prepare it, you can watch my video on vermicelli rice, which should be in the top right corner. With the rice added, give it a good mix until the rice and vermicelli are evenly distributed. The secret to help marry the flavours of the dish is adding in a few large tablespoons of the tomato sauce. Add it into the base and then give the pot a good mix. Now it's time to add the cooked lentils to the base. Toss them in and then mix until well combined. We're also going to add a few tablespoons of the Dakkah vinegar garlic sauce to the base, and that will help layer the flavours together. Add in about 3 to 4 tablespoons of it. Finally, we'll add the liquid needed to get the rice and vermicelli cooking. Pour in all of the leftover liquid from the lentils and then add in enough water until the rice and vermicelli are just submerged. Add 1 teaspoon of salt to the rice and mix once more before covering the pot with a tight fitting lid. To cook it, bring the pot up to a boil on high heat, and then after a few minutes of boiling, check to see if the water has evaporated from the bottom of the pot. If it has evaporated, turn the heat down to low and leave it to steam covered for 20 to 30 minutes. If after 20 minutes your rice is too wet, then leave it uncovered to evaporate any excess liquid. And if it's too dry, then consider adding a little more water and steaming for an additional 10 minutes. Once cooked, your koshari base should look like this. The rice should be perfectly cooked and fluffy, and the vermicelli should be soft and tender. The final component in this dish is the pasta, and this is the easiest one to make. The correct pasta choice here is this small tube-shaped one called Ditalini, but you do sometimes see other shapes in the dish. I would recommend going for something that is small and hollow so that it doesn't change the final appearance or texture of the dish. In my pot, I've got some heavily salted water boiling. Add 250 grams or 9 ounces of pasta to the water and cook it according to the instructions on the packet until it's al dente, then drain it and set it aside. With the pasta cooked, we can combine it with the rice to make the koshari base, and it's easiest to do this in 2 halves. Add about half of the pasta to the pot and then start mixing to combine. Now 2 things that are important to note. First, try not to use a ton of pressure when mixing, as the rice can be a bit delicate and you don't want it to break. Second thing is that you should try not to scrape the bottom of the pot. Because of the sheer amount of ingredients, it's normal for some to burn onto the base of your pot. Try not to disturb the burnt layer so you don't end up with burnt rice mixing into your base. Once you've mixed in the first half of the pasta, add the rest of it to the pot and mix once more until evenly combined. Once all the pasta and rice has been mixed, you'll end up with something that looks like this. So after what feels like a marathon of cooking, it's time to put the whole dish together, and I promise it's worth all the effort it needed. Usually koshari is a build your own dish, where you control the amounts of each component, but here's how you'd put it together into an amazing platter. We'll start off by adding a fair amount of the koshari base to a serving dish. Now since this makes up the bulk of the dish, you'll add a large pile of it. Once you've got the base on there, it's time for the tomato sauce, and you'll add a few large serving spoons of this over the base. Next, it's time to add some of the Dakkah, or garlic and vinegar sauce. Make sure to stir it once more, and then add a few tablespoons directly to the platter. Next up, the chickpeas, and once again, you'll go across the centre of the plate, adding a few tablespoons of the chickpeas. Finally, add the crispy fried onions to the dish, with a generous serving over the top of the chickpeas. And that's your Koshari platter done. So here's the final dish we prepared, and it really looks delicious. When serving, you want to also plate all the separate components and serve them on the table together. That way anyone can build a plate just the way they want. I'm a fan of the extra dakkah, extra chili and extra onions combination. Be sure to give that a try. Now it's time for the taste test. So I've been trying to film a taste test and I've already eaten a quarter of the dish, as you can see. I mean, first things first, it tastes bloody brilliant. You wouldn't think all the ingredients necessarily work together, but actually they're in perfect harmony. And the great thing about this dish is you can whip up a big batch for friends, and then everyone can just customize it to their liking. It's also really cheap and will keep you full for the whole day. It's no wonder that this is the national dish of Egypt and it's so popular in the region. Give it a try and I promise you won't be disappointed. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to like, share and subscribe, as it really helps the channel. As usual, all the ingredients and directions are in the description box below, and I'll be back next week with another recipe.